welcome back. Today we're going to start off where we left off, and in part 2 today you're going to see me assemble the face of the switch panel, which is the plexiglass or Lexan sheet with the holes drilled in it, with the switches and all of the other doodads that go along with making a control panel. And as I said in the last video, this is a great way to make a sub panel, so it's a great video to watch. It's very modular, and it is a good way to go for layouts of all sizes, not just these little ones. So with that said, let's get started. Okay, so we've got the back half of the control panel here cleaned up and ready to go pretty much. We will be adding a couple more wires into the mix. So we will have our 2 track wires coming in, and then we will have the 2 wires coming from the control panel that feed the switch controls as well. So it'll be 4 more wires coming into this. I'm not quite sure where yet though, so we'll get back to that momentarily. So I'm gonna go ahead and move this out of the way. So what you've seen me do in past videos is take a piece of thin plywood and sandwich the piece of paper between that and the Lexan, but in this case we're not going to do that. We're actually going to secure it directly to it with some spray adhesive. So this one still has the protective cover on both sides. I'm going to go ahead and pull off the white one just so you can see what I'm doing. So, and then you'll see that, you know, the edges here, this is actually just the peel on the other side. So I'm going to make sure that this is nice and clean. So I'm just rubbing in one direction. What this does is it pulls off any sawdust residue that there might be on there, dust, etc. Because what we're going to do is we're actually going to use contact spray adhesive. Now this is the same stuff that I use for pretty much everything. So it's a 3M number 45. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray this. Now I'm actually going to take this outside so it doesn't smell. But give me 1 second to spray. I'll be right back. So what I've done is I've just sprayed a fine mist of the contact adhesive onto the plexi. And a little bit on my arm apparently. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my sheet of paper. Keep in mind that you can use some tape to help with this. And I'm going to use a little putty knife here. This is actually the same thing you use for Bondo. You can just use your hand though. The idea here is just to make sure that it's nice and flat and very well adhered. Make sure there's no bumps. Make sure it all looks good on the other side. It does look good. So now that we have that secured, I'm actually going to use some contact paper. So it's just another thing I picked up at Home Depot. Cost me, it was $5 or $8. And what I'm doing here is I'm just providing a black backdrop, which will make the colors on the sheet of paper pop just a little bit better. So I'm gonna go ahead and just pull out a little bit more than what I need. And the beauty of this stuff is it is labeled, so every 18 inches. So you can go ahead and use that as a place to mark and or cut this stuff. So you only cut what you need. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to peel back this first inch. Or 2, as it were. And I'm actually going to secure it to my work surface. So I'm just pressing it down to my work surface. Now the reason I'm doing that is that gives me a third hand. So when I start working it onto this, it goes on nice and flat. So I'm working it in a couple different directions. The idea here is to eliminate bubbles. And then I'm going to take my box knife and just cut around it. So take your time with this stuff. It doesn't really matter if it takes you 2 minutes or 20. There's no time limit on the adhesive on this peel and stick stuff. Just want to make sure you do a nice job. Get it well secured. And then you just look at it from the top now. It currently looks a little scratched up, but that is because of the plastic that's still on it. But you'll see as soon as I peel that away, it's now nice and clean, ready to rock and roll. So this is our face before any of the holes. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull a little trick here. I have an Expo dry erase marker, and I'm just going to mark where I know I need to drill holes. So I know I need to drill a hole here, there, and then I know I need to drill them on the switches. Crossovers, I always go in the middle of the pair, and then otherwise I go towards the back of the switch. Now these two in particular, they're very close together. Beauty of a dry erase marker is it does go away pretty easily. So I'm actually going to spread these out a little bit. But that's all the holes I know I need to make on this particular control panel. So, and then the switches I'm using, I know they need a 1/4 inch hole. But I'm not going to go ahead and drill a 1/4 inch hole right away. I'm actually going to start with a very small drill bit, probably this 16th or 5/64, and then I'm actually going to work my way up until the drill bit size that I know I need. In this case, it's going to be probably the 1/4 inch. But what I'll do is I'll actually drill a test hole in a piece of plywood just to make sure that that is the correct size I need, because you can't make the hole smaller, but you can make it bigger. Okay, so because this is plywood, I can just go ahead and go to the big bit. But I went ahead and drilled a hole, and then let's make sure that fits in there. There's just a little bit of wiggle room, that's perfect. And then because I know I'm using 2 different types of switches by 2 different manufacturers, I'm gonna go ahead and check the other one as well. Okay, that one fits too. So we know that this is the largest bit. We know this is the largest bit size we have to go to, so we'll step up to that bit size. Apologies for CSX ruining our audio. They will be gone here shortly. We're somewhere along in the orange picking season, and most likely that is what that train is. It's either that or it is an intermodal train that is heading down to the yard, which is just south of Winter Haven, Florida. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get started with this small bit here. So this is a 3/32. So when you're drilling these, the number one thing you want to do is you want to make sure you're using 1, very sharp drill bits. 2, take your time. The last thing you want this thing doing is popping and jumping on the drill bit while you're drilling your holes. So go very slow and make sure you hold it down very tightly right by the bit. So in this case, I'm actually going to hold on either side of the hole with my fingers to make sure it doesn't jump. Now it's going to bounce around a little bit, but provided it doesn't like try to hop up onto the drill bit, you'll be just fine. So now we have all of our holes drilled. Everything looks nice and organized. It's all lining up very well. And as you can tell, the back is very clean. So it should go together pretty well. So for the on-off switches, I actually have these pre-wired switches that I got on Amazon. Link below, of course. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to go ahead and take all of the nuts off. And then this switch is currently in the off position. And I know that because the center lug and the top lug are soldered onto. And what the switch does here is it actually kind of points in the direction it's connecting. So that is on, that's off. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it in the off position. And then I know when I put it through this hole here that that's the position it needs to be on for that as well. So these switches do come with washers and things to keep them locked in position. I found that it works a lot better to use an appropriate socket than it does to try and use a pair of pliers or something. It keeps you from marring up the plexiglass. So I'm going to go ahead and do this one more time. Okay, so that's those three switches. So on, off, on, off. And now I always check these because sometimes they're off by just a little bit. I want to make sure that they're lined up and they're in a nice straight row on the back as well. So I will now go ahead and take my hot glue gun and I'm going to put a bead of hot glue on either side of these switches, just to lock them in place so they don't move around on me. And then we'll move on to all of the other switches. Now the reason I did those first is because those are the easy ones. So now I'm going to go ahead and set this off to the side too. And now I'm going to pull up this little guy. Now this was actually a gift from a client, and what it is, it's a work holder. So these are momentary switches. So they normally sit in the middle, but you can click them to the bottom or the top in order to throw a switch. So this is how you wire a Kato switch without using those obnoxiously large blue switches that Kato comes with. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stick this in here, but then I'm going to set it off to the side because I'm going to show you how we're going to wire this. So wiring these switches really isn't all that difficult. So you got 6 lugs. And what I'm going to use today here is I'm going to use orange and blue just to give you an idea. So to go to the switch, so the switch is over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take blue and we're going to connect to this lug here, and then that goes to the switch. And then orange is going to go from this lug here to this lug and then off to the switch. So that accounts for 4 lugs, but we don't have a power in yet. The power in is just as simple. It's just going to be a red and black going to the center lugs. It's really that simple. So what this looks like in real life is obviously a lot smaller, which is why I drew this picture for you, just so you have a better idea of what's going on. So to get started, I've got my red and my black. So these are going to connect to the two center lugs. And then I'm just going to go ahead and make a little hook and hook it through the eyelets on this switch. Now keep in mind, when you solder these, you want them to be pointed out. So you want to make sure that you solder them like this. You don't want them pulled over on either side because they could touch the other lugs. So again, we're going to be using our Oatly tinning flux. And I'm going to apply it so you really don't need a whole lot. Basically, just touching it will be plenty. So you'll notice that I'm just tapping, and the reason I can do this is because my soldering iron is hot. It is not set on a low setting. It's actually set to the highest setting that's possible, so I've just got it set to 5 over here. I'm going to go ahead and use my rail nippers to cut off the extra wire here. So now I've got a nice clean joint. So I've got a piece of wire here. I'm going to go ahead and actually strip it about an inch and a half back. Pull it back a little bit and fold it in half. And then I'm going to strip off the plastic off of the little piece that's sticking out. So what I'm doing here is I'm giving myself 2 solder points, but I'm leaving the insulated portion in between. So when I go ahead and I solder this on, I can jump between the 2 different leads and it's not going to short out on anything. Okay, so that is one completed switch. So the red and black, those are actually going to get jumped from each switch, and then ultimately just the 2 wires will connect. Meanwhile, the white and the green here, those are actually going to go to the wires that came in on the back of the switch panel, and those will connect ultimately to the switches down on the layout. So the green and whites I'm actually going to cut off at about 1 foot long. That's plenty long for our little control panel, but that gives us a little bit of extra leeway so we can organize our wires. And then the red and the black, I know those are going to connect to the other switches, but I don't know where yet. So I'm going to go ahead and leave about 4 feet of wire on that, and I'll clip off the excess for those. And then I'm going to go ahead and get the other switches wired up, and then we'll come back when I'm done with that. Okay, so now that I have all of the switches roughly made up, I'm going to go ahead and start installing them in the switch panel. Now, even though these switches point in different directions, just for the sake of not messing with people's heads, I'm going to make all of them go up down. So even if the switch is on an angle here, it's still going to be a vertical alignment. And that includes this one over here. The beauty of these switches is, if it's not going the right direction, you press it the wrong direction, it's not going to do anything, it's just going to click. So provided somebody doesn't sit there and hold it hoping that something will happen, everything should work out really, really well. So I'm going to go ahead and start installing these. Okay, so I've got them all in place. They're all roughly square with the body of the switch panel. Now I'm going to go ahead and, like last time, I'm going to glue them in place. Okay, so now this looks like a bit of a rat's nest, but I assure you it actually isn't. So I have it set so the green and white wires are all on the same side of the switch, in this case towards you. And then at the moment, the red and the black is only attached actually to the one switch. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to daisy chain it to all of the other switches. And then this just connects off to the switch panel itself. Okay, so now that I have the switch panel itself all wired up, I have all the switches in place, I'm going to go ahead and tell you what I did on the inside of the box off camera. So I went ahead and installed both my track wire and my switch power wires coming in, and I just made a little pigtail on the back and then put it through some shrink wrap, and then I went ahead and connected it to the terminal strips here. I did go ahead and add this terminal strip off screen, but I did the same way as all the others. So, and then also with the switch panel itself, I did notice that this switch in particular does interfere with the side a little bit, so I went ahead and just took a drill bit and waddled this out a little bit. Nothing fancy. So in order for me to wire this comfortably, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to flip this on its side like so. And I'm going to grab some little squeeze clamps. And I'm just going to squeeze clamp it in place. Now this does two things for me. One is that obviously it holds it up, but it also ensures that when I am wiring this, that if I ever do need to get into it, all of these wires are going to be long enough for me to actually do that. So I've got a bunch of pairs of wires. I've got green and white coming from each of the switches. And then I've got the red and black wires here. These are the on-off switches for the track segments. So if you recall, in previous segments, I've got the blue, red, and the green, which all turn on and off. So I know that this one here, this is going to be blue. So I just have to consult my drawing again to remember. Blue is actually going to be purple gray. So I know purple is going to be my hot for that. So I'm going to go ahead and strip these back so they're separate wires versus the joined pairs. And while I realize this doesn't make a whole lot of sense at the moment, as soon as things do start coming together, they will make more sense. So I have my white wire already connected up over here, and you remember that when I put all this together earlier, I joined all the colored wires together. So that's my white. So that is my outer rail on all of the switched on-off track segments. And then all of these other colors, the brown, purple, blue, and red, those are going to be the segments that turn on and or off. Okay, so like I said, I go ahead and I strip back all the wires and I connected all the black ones, and I'm going to go ahead and put a spade connector on there, and I'm going to solder that in place. Use my third hand here real quick just to hold it for me. Now this is an old version, but the new ones are actually nicer because they actually have a couple hands, and they're not really expensive either. And of course there's a link down below for that. If you're not familiar with why I'm always hawking Amazon products, there's a real simple reason for it actually. So when you click on one of those links down below, I actually get a little tiny cut. And by tiny, I mean I get about 3 cents on a dollar. But what that does is that allows me to keep making these videos. It helps me pay for all the camera equipment and other things. And also allows me to do giveaways like I'm doing on another video right now where I'm actually giving away a pair of rail nippers that I have made. So, and I'll go ahead and link that video, probably in the upper corner, or at least in the video description down below. But it's really nice because you take a pair of regular wire cutters, and with some simple modifications, you can cut O-gauge track with it and get beautiful results. And because you can cut O-gauge track with it, you can also cut HO and N and Z and whatever scale you might be working with, and get a nice clean result, and still have the ability to cut wire with the same tool. Most of the time you can't do that. Alright, so I've got my blacks connected now. So now my top one right here, that's actually going to be my blue track. So blue is actually purple gray on the diagram. So, and I know gray is in the mix over here connected to white. So I'm going to go ahead and connect to purple. And because this wire is so small and it's only a single piece, I'm just going to go ahead and bend over the edge, and then I'm going to stick it underneath the screw. So now that I got all of those connected, I'm going to go ahead and grab some zip ties, and I'm going to clean that up. So the zip tie gun I'm using is actually, it's one of my favorite tools actually. It saves me a bunch of time and solves a lot of hassles. But the general idea there is that you know, it goes ahead and it both makes it nice and tight, but also cuts it off nice and flush, so you don't have to worry about it poking you or cutting you or anything like that. Okay, so this set of wires here is going to be my power in for my switch machines. So I'm going to go ahead and trim these. Take a little bit of length off. Now I'm still keeping it plenty long because I want to make sure that if I do have to get in here for any maintenance, the wire breaks, something like that, I've still got plenty of length to work with to fix any of those inevitabilities. And since this is solid core wire, I don't have to pre-tin it or anything. I can just go ahead and bend myself a little shepherd's hook on it, so I can go ahead and put it underneath my screw terminals. Okay, there you have it. That's everything wired up, ready to go on the inside. So far, so good. So because I know that I'm probably going to have to come in here and swap some of these connections around, I'm not going to go ahead and put in all of the screws on the face right away. What I'll do instead is I'll just go ahead and make sure this lays in nice and flat. And I will put 2 screws in it. And on the front here, I'll be using these little black screws. Mostly because I really like the aesthetic of them. They remind me of rivets. There you have it. There is one control panel, which is completely self-contained. The only thing coming out are those little connectors there. Okay, so now I've got it installed on the layout, and a few things have changed since the last time we saw the layout. So I built a little shelf here. It's just 7.5 inches deep. It's about 12 inches tall, and I put a piece of 1/4 inch plywood on the back so it looks nice. Drilled a little hole through it so I could put my wires in place. And then this is actually what I wanted to show you in particular. You see there's 3 holes here, and what that does is that actually allows you to set the angle of the switch panel. So in this particular case, I've got it set on the middle hole, which is a slight angle, but the lower hole will allow you to lay it flatter back. And then the topmost hole will actually allow you to lay the switch panel nice and flush, so it can be perfectly flat up and down. And then the nice thing about the way I built this switch panel is this is what the wiring looks like from the back side. So it's nice and simple, it looks good, it functions, and the only wire that hangs down is the power wire.
So if you've liked today's video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help with the algorithm, and it does help other people find the videos. Um, the next series coming up is actually going to be a large HO layout that actually has a couple O-gauge loops underneath it. It's really, really cool. I'm really having some fun building it, and I can't wait to show you guys. So until then, I'll see you on the next video.